17th BRICS summit is underway currently in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and in the opening plenary, Prime Minister Narendra Modi did speak, and he made a passionate case for the need for reform of global institutions such as the United Nations and others. And other than that, President Lula had made his inaugural address as the chair of the 17th BRICS summit, where he had not just raised the issue of the need for importance of reform of global governance institutions, but also he pointed to the challenge faced by humanity by terrorism, and he also did mention the terror attack in Kashmir. He mentioned it and he condemned it. So let's get now more analysis from Professor Gulshan Sachdev. He is with the School of International Studies in JNU. Professor Sachdev, pleasure to have you on DD India. You know, let's begin with the Prime Minister's address, and like I've been talking to my reporter as well, the Prime Minister spoke about how the Global South has been at the receiving end of just token gestures and double standards on the issue of climate finance, technology, sustainable development, access to resources, so on and so forth. And he also did mention that if BRICS can do it, if G20 can do it, the reform that is of having more representation of Global South countries, then why can the UNSC, the WTO and multilateral development banks not do it? What do you think is the way forward?
Well, I think the way forward is asserting, and way forward is just keep reminding the world that, you know, what we really need is reforms in the institutions of the global governance. And the core of this reform is really the reform of the UNSC. And I think this has been the very clear message one here in this, particularly the initial plenary session, where President Lula and our Prime Minister and many others, I think, are going to speak in the similar language. Two things. One is that the Global South is asserting, and we do need reforms in all these global institutions of global governance. But I think, you know, what BRICS must also do, and I think they would be talking about this as well, it's not just only saying and asserting at the summit, but also bring out certain deliverables with different kind of norms, like they came out earlier in 2014 in Brazil itself with the New Development Bank. Even if, in fact, you know, numbers may be small, what they're doing, but the norms, the way I think the institutions are governed, where even not, I mean, the votes within the New Development Banks are not on the basis of how much money you have actually contributed. Everybody has an equal share. So it means there are different kind of norms of governance of all the institutions of the global governance. This is what I think the BRICS stand. But you know what is very, very important today, when we are seeing very clearly that institutions of the global governance is not really working. You look at WTO, you look at UNSC, you look at even WHO and many others, and even climate discussions and talk, particularly when the US is out, is also not really working in the way we would like to see. And the climate finance, the kind of money which is really required. And the Brazil, of course, would be raising that issue very, very clearly because they are going to have COP30 there. So you need at least $1.3 trillion of money for climate finance. So the global South, in that sense, is asserting, and the reform is really the key. But I think, as I said, the BRICS itself also has to come out with something new to really show the world that things can be done differently.
Okay. Quoting President Lula, he said the ideology of hate cannot be associated with any religion or nationality. Brazil condemns the attacks in Kashmir. So this is what he said on Kashmir and on the issue of terrorism. Do you think that this is going to resonate as far as the joint declaration is concerned, or the leaders' declaration is concerned? Will the Pahalgam terror attack be mentioned there? Will all the countries come on board to condemn it? And will the challenge of cross-border terrorism also find mention there?
I think it's highly likely that it would be mentioned, because if the president of Brazil has mentioned in the beginning itself, and India, of course, has been pushing it, but it's also very, very important from the Indian point of view that bringing these issues, and particularly the issue of cross-border terrorism, and even particularly mentioning Pahalgam, if we find that in the final declaration, I think this will be quite satisfying from the Indian point of view, because normally, I mean, in BRICS, they do talk about all kind of issues, from trade, investment to climate change to artificial intelligence to, health, agriculture, etc. So broad, in fact, issues which are social, economic, political, and also issues of global governance and the reforms of institutions. But normally, in fact, they had shied away earlier, talking about security issues and particularly issues where, in fact, some of the countries, as we have seen, even within the BRICS itself, they might have slight reservations on mentioning particular incidents. But I think that will be quite, I mean, think important thing if that happens, and I think it's likely to happen now.
Also, further quoting President Lula, Professor, he said that BRICS is the heir to the non-aligned movement. With multilateralism under attack, our autonomy is once again at risk. Hard-won advances like climate and trade regimes are under threat. So, we were all discussing earlier about how whether there would be a leaders' declaration because the decisions are consensus based, and there is one view that BRICS is seen as an anti-Western group. Another view is that it is not anti-West, that it is just the voice of the global South, and there are countries like India that believe in strategic autonomy, and in the decisions that they take in multilateral fora that reflects. So, what sort of wording or language do you expect? Would it be really carefully worded? Will there be balancing act in the leaders' declaration? Because here clearly we know where this particular statement is tilted.
Well, language would be very, very carefully worded because, today the BRICS actually, I think, facing two major, I mean, I would say challenges. One is it has expanded. So there are different kind of members. Some members which are quite anti-US and West, particularly look at Iran or Russia. But then you also have members, like UAE, Egypt, India, and other those who have worked very closely with the United States and other Western countries as well. And President Lula, as a chair of BRICS, I think he'll be very, very careful. In one way, he would like to really assert BRICS as a really very important alternative which can provide alternative governance. At the same time, he also would not like to, to be seen, or BRICS would not like to be seen as a kind of anti-West or anti-US. And particularly when we have President Trump, who has been making many statements about some of the activities of BRICS, particularly when Russians were talking about common currency and some others supported. So I think he'll be very, very careful. This is a act, but you will find many of those issues very, very clearly, because today the global South, I think everybody has realized, is very different. You have it's not just bunch of you developing countries. Yes, there is a legacy of non-alignment. There is a legacy of what the new international economic order we were talking about in the 70s. But this is something very different world today we are. So the global South countries, look at the countries which are the BRICS or the partner countries. I mean, if you look at and the countries which are likely to join or they are willing to or they have shown their interest in BRICS. I mean, you put them together, they are really huge. I mean, they are economically, strategically, politically, even intellectually, they are really heavyweights. So you can't really now ignore many of them. But of course, there are also certain differences among members. We are very clear. I mean, we know that on certain issues there are challenges between India and China. But I think still, I think all the countries have come together, and they would like to see something very, very different than what. And in fact, our Prime Minister has very clearly, as mentioned, that you can't have 21st century software, through 20th century typewriters or something. So in that sense, the norms and everything, the way things are governed in the world, is simply not suitable for today's world, and global South is really, really asserting. And BRICS, as a kind of a leading voice of the global South, putting together all these countries, they would like to be at the forefront of this, I would say, of change, or the West-centric and the US-centric model is simply not working. And all the look at all the major problems of the world today for the last 15, 20 years.
And he also said in that context, since you are talking about it, that international law has become a dead letter along with peaceful resolution of disputes and how various wars are waged without taking the approval of the UNSC.
Well, that's true. I mean, all the major problems you can see, not just only in the security front. We have seen now more than 3 years now in the Ukraine war, what has happened in Gaza, and I think he also mentioned very clearly about the whole kind of violations which are taking place in Gaza and many, many other places. So it means the UNSC, which obviously is not effective at all, and many other even economic institutions. I mean, look at, yes, they were effective to some extent. You look at earlier the subprime crisis, then you have the Eurozone crisis, then many other crises which happened. But the problem from the global south is that, all these problems, whether you look at economic problems, even security problems, most of them have really originated from the West or, from the North itself, not really from the South. But the impact of that has been really on South. You look at the oil prices, you look at the volatility in the markets, and I think another problem with most of the countries, with the BRICS members of the global South, they are facing, or at least they are feeling, the way West has really weaponized these financial systems. I mean, the SWIFT has been cut off for Russia, and they can do with many other countries as well. So all the countries in the global South, in that sense, they are alarmed. So they are trying to find certain alternatives, but of course, there's still a long way to go. I mean, even if when the Russians are talking about, common currency, and suddenly you can see the reactions from the US and particularly from the President Trump. But at the same time, the reality is that most of the members of BRICS, they are already, making transactions in their local currencies, and particularly if you look at the last expansion of BRICS, which happened, when many of the oil-producing countries, became member. You are Iran, you have UAE, Saudi Arabia, of course, formally has not joined, but may join at some point. Egypt and many others. So these are the countries which are, and of course, Russia was very much there. So the countries which are really producing energy, and then you also have major countries which are major, consumers of energy. Look at China and many others, and they are already making their transactions in local currencies. We are making payments in some currencies, some local currency, or using some currencies of other BRICS countries. So this is happening to some extent bilaterally, and maybe now the BRICS has to come out for some kind of mechanisms, may not be common currency, but at least for one or two commodities, they can do certain transactions within some kind of BRICS mechanism. I think many of the things are possible. It will take time, but I think, the alternatives have to be there. Then only, BRICS will become much more effective, and others will have to, kind of listen to what BRICS is doing. They are taking notice, but now sometimes they are also threatening what BRICS can do and what BRICS is can likely to do, because of geopolitical tensions between China and Russia, or between China and US, and also, all the wars, etc., and with Europe and Russia. So those are other kind of tensions which are also kind of, influencing their thinking and, talking about BRICS. But BRICS is moving, and the way I think the global geopolitics have moved in the last few years, definitely there is a momentum in BRICS. But BRICS is also, going to be very, very careful, because they know things are not easy, because, you also have the trade war, you also have many other things are happening, and nobody wants to really, make those statements which can suddenly make particular Americans angry about BRICS, etc. So they
Absolutely. So it will be really well thought out, as all such declarations are, and it's interesting to point out here. It's also important to point out here that India would be the next chair of the BRICS summit. So in 2026, we will be hosting the BRICS summit. So of course, a lot of commonalities there as far as concerns of the global south is concerned. We'll leave it at that. Professor Sachdev, thank you so much for joining us with your perspective.